actually done their testing and their stress testing to figure out that they will actually be able to meet all the timelines that have been now put down. Overall, I guess what we're really pleased about is that what this will result in is that the issuers will get their money quicker, the investors will get their shares quicker, those who didn't get allotment will get their refund or the unblocking quicker. So at the end of the day, time is money. So with this process, we will be giving to all the market participants lots of money in the form of 3 days. Item number 2 is in the area of listed debt. Here there are 2 provisions which are in some way linked. The first is in respect of if an entity has a listed paper, then subject to some provisions and some exemptions, the regulation will now be that all the paper that they issue would need to be listed. The reason for this is that, as you know, the bond market is not very liquid, and price discovery and valuation happens based on not just the trading in that particular, in the paper of that particular issuer, but also in terms of the primary issuances done by that issuer. And therefore, the transparency on what was the latest primary issuance done by that issuer becomes very important for price discovery in the secondary market. So that has really been the driver of this proposal. Having said that, so what they will really be required to do, and in any case those issuers are complying with all the regulations because they have one listed paper, so they are anyway complying with all the regulations. The only additional requirement from them will be in terms of transparency of the structure and the terms of the what so far was unlisted debt issuance. So that is something that will help to improve price discovery in the market. Linked to it is the issue of voluntary delisting, because when we got feedback from the market, as you know, we do very extensive public consultation. So one of the feedback that we got was that there may be some entities who do not really have plans of a lot of issue raising and raising of funds, and they were a one-off issuer, and they may not want to remain listed. So is there a mechanism for them to delist their bonds and be able to then therefore not have this requirement of continuous listing? So we have facilitated that, again subject to some conditions and some requirements. Number 3 is the enablement of direct participation in the Limited Purpose Clearing Corporation. In the last board meeting, the board had approved certain provisions for the Limited Purpose Clearing Corporation. As you know, this is the clearing corporation for the corporate bond repo market. So this, as you would recollect, is really a very important institutional building block for the bond markets, because if we are trying to encourage liquidity in the bond market, that can come only through market making, and market makers will have a viable business model only if they can have access to low-cost funds for their inventory, and that can only come from the overnight market in terms of the corporate bond repo market. So as a result of this, this last time we had done, there are 2 modes by which people can participate in the LPCC. Because this is an overnight market, the timeliness of being able to lend and borrow money is very important. So people would want as long a period to have flexibility in terms of being able to do the transaction, but they would need to have the settlement as quickly as possible so that they have access to funds. So for that, direct participation by the clients in the LPCC is quite crucial. So today the board approved a mechanism which would enable that to happen in order to facilitate even greater participation in the corporate bond repo market. The next item is in respect of REITs and InvITs. As you know, SEBI considers this a very, very important channel or a very important product through which capital raising can be done in our markets. We think there's a huge potential both in terms of our infrastructure space as well as the real estate space. And we found over the last many months that there is a very significant interest from capital providers, including overseas providers, in these vehicles. So what we have really done is we have introduced the concept of, so first what we have done is we have brought in a minimum unit holding requirement by sponsors. Reason for this is really very similar to the concept of skin in the game in mutual funds that we have. So the thought is that since the sponsors play a very active role in the REIT InvIT structure, very often they are the ones who are the promoters of the investment manager or the project manager. They actually are the operating entity for the operating asset. Therefore, for them to have a skin in the game beyond the 3 years that we had currently stipulated was important. However, again, based on the market feedback that we received as part of our public consultation, we got a lot of feedback, and we have therefore created the concept of the self-sponsored investment manager, which means that if an original sponsor wishes to have 100% monetization and to exit his role as sponsor, he not only will anyway have the option of finding another sponsor to come and step into his shoes. That was an option that was always available. But now they would also have an option of the investment manager itself being a self-sponsored investment manager. So this is additional flexibility which has been offered to the industry, and there has been a very positive response to this flexibility. We then move on to item number 5. This is also something, again, which is in response to the need of the market. As you know, REITs and InvITs are very long-term investments, and they tend to be big, bulky investments. They're not a very diversified set of assets. And in that context, the unit holders felt that there was a need for them to be a part of the decision-making process of the investment manager, particularly because a large number of transactions do tend to happen as related party transactions with the sponsor, because the whole construct is that the sponsor is really monetizing his or her assets. So a large part of the assets that are purchased by the REIT or InvIT actually belong to the sponsor. So in a way, it is a related party transaction. And on an ongoing basis, a lot of the management of the asset is done again by the project manager or the investment manager, which is again typically belonging to the sponsor. So in this context, in order to give a uniformity of rights to the unit holders, what we have proposed is that anyone who crosses the 10% threshold of unit holding has the right to nominate a director. Of course, they may choose not to exercise that right. And even people who are below the 10% threshold can get together and nominate a person. But naturally, this person would need to be fully empowered by the investors who are nominating him or her, because there are very often confidential deals, there is confidential information, timely decision-making. So it is envisaged that there would be some form of power of attorney. So if 3-4 people together have 10% and are nominating somebody to the board, they would effectively give a power of attorney to this person to represent them on the board. So this would ensure that there is a certain parity and uniformity of nomination rights on the board of the investment manager. The next one is in respect of additional disclosures from FPIs that fulfill certain criteria, certain objective criteria. Here, the essential driver and the regulatory intent really is that there is a possibility that if there is a layering of investments across various FPIs and deeper layers within the FPI, then it is possible that the people who are actually the economic interest holders of the FPIs may be, on an aggregate basis, may be holding enough percentage of the shares so as to either trigger the minimum public shareholding regulations or the SAST, which is the substantial acquisition of shares and takeover regulations. So one of these two, there could potentially be a violation which would need to be examined if, so the granular information would ensure that this violation does not happen. Also, we were concerned about the possible misuse of the FPI route to circumvent requirements of Press Note 3, which, as you know, is applicable for FDI investments. And so all of these things put together, we have come up with the proposal, broadly speaking, for two categories of FPIs. One category is that which holds more than 50% of their Indian equity AUM in a single corporate group, Indian corporate group. This is the first category. The second category is where FPIs, and as some of you may be familiar, there's a concept called FPI group. If they together hold more than 25,000 crores of equity AUM in the Indian markets, then we consider them quite significant. And so this would be the second category. However, not all people who are qualifying under this would necessarily need to give the granular disclosures. There are a large number of entities which are actually exempt. So, for instance, any government or government-related investor, any sovereign wealth fund, any pension fund or public retail fund, listed ETFs, certain listed corporate entities, certain verified pooled investment vehicles, all of these people would really be exempt from the provisions of this disclosure, and there would be only a relatively small, where this concentration or this size is there, who would then be required to make this additional disclosure. The last one is in respect of our grievance handling mechanism. As you know, SEBI runs the score system. So what we have done is to streamline and strengthen that score system and also create a link to a new platform with the online dispute resolution mechanism, which was approved in the previous board meeting. So here what would happen now is that the investors who have a grievance would have the ability to, first of all, there would be two levels of escalation. So apart from the intermediary who is supposed to resolve the complaint, there would be a designated body who would need to resolve, to review that if the investor is not satisfied. So let's say an exchange would be one such entity. If the investor is still not satisfied, then SEBI would review it. So that's the second level of review. If after that they are not satisfied, they can go to the online dispute resolution mechanism, where again there is a conciliation mechanism. And up to this level, this is all completely free of cost. Investor doesn't have to incur any cost whatsoever. If after that he's still aggrieved, which means 4 levels have really gone against the investor or in favor of the intermediary, then it would need to go into an arbitration mode. And because these new ODRs are there, they are much more cost effective for the investor as compared to the traditional modes. But of course, the investor would still retain all his rights to approach any other forum as he may want to do for the purpose of his grievance redress. So that was also approved by the board, and of course our annual report and our annual accounts were also approved by the board. So that's where we are.